Hi folks, welcome back. Thank you for watching. Please do hit subscribe if you haven't done so yet. It really does help when you do that. So today folks, welcome to the end of month Q&A for September 2021. And I've got some light back this month. If you saw last month's Q&A, you'll have seen that pretty much all of my ceiling lights had broken and I looked like I was reading a ghost story with a torch. So hopefully today everything's a bit brighter and looking slightly more professional. Now there's been some pretty big videos in September. I've got a lot of comments and feedback from you folks to get through. So we're going to crack straight on with it. So let's see who's first up this month. Reckless Toboggan. Monty's in the Heritage 535. That's just what guitar is supposed to sound like. And this was the first of the bigger videos comparing the Monty's PAFs to the ThroBak SLE 101s. And as you rightly say, I think the Monty's really suited the Heritage, and I've always loved how those pickups sound in thin line guitars. Because comparing them to the ThroBaks, they were a little bit tighter in the low end and had a little bit more sort of snap in the upper mid-range. And I think that those characteristics compensate for, they're not shortcomings, but the tonal characteristics of a thin line. They are a little bit kind of lacking in definition low down compared to a solid body, and they can sound a little bit kind of soft in their attacks. So the characteristics of the pickups and the characteristics of the guitar really sort of fitted together, and they really work. So yeah, go figure that I left the Montys in that guitar long term and the ThroBaks in my Les Paul. They really work in that order. Who is Michael Moshos? Great demo, mate. Thanks for doing this. I wouldn't want to be in your place to change twice the pickups on the hollow body. Yep, as I said, I left the Montys in there and I never want to touch the electronics on that guitar ever again. Rewiring a thin line is one of my least favourite jobs. It is an absolute ball ache. Both sets sound equally great for me. They have their small differences, but mostly they sound quite similar. I'm waiting on a set of Wiz to see how they compare to my Montys. Keep up with your great work. Cheers from Greece. Thank you, Michael. And I would love to try a set of Wiz pickups, actually. They seem to be in that kind of very upper tier bracket alongside ThroBak and Dave Stevens and people like that make the kind of so vintage correct it hurts old style pickups. So, you know, being in the UK, I'd have to pay import duty and all that sort of stuff that really bumps the price up. And whenever I check out their website, their shop always seems to be closed because I assume they're so busy. But I'd love to find a second-hand set somewhere in the UK, but it's definitely on my wish list to try a set of Wizzers. Lane Tacker. I have the ThroBak SLE 101s in my R8 and they sound amazing, clean, and the bridge sounds great. Any tips for getting rid of some of the mud in my neck pickup? Now I made a video start of this year, maybe tail end of 2020, all about dialing in pickups. And one thing that I showed in that is for a humbucker pickup, if you drop the whole pickup down slightly but then raise the pole screws, that can have the effect of keeping the output pretty much the same as it was, but reducing low end and adding treble. So you can kind of tilt the sort of EQ of the pickup, and that can be a really nice way of getting rid of mud. So if you drop the pickup down slightly, bump the pole screws up, that should hopefully remedy that problem, you know, a little bit. Ultimately, you might want to explore a different pickup if it's a really big problem, but given that it's a matched set of SLE 101s, I think a slight adjustment should do you. But start there and see how you get on. A lot of people think the pole screws on a humbucker are purely ornamental. They're not. It's so you can adjust the balance, usually from like one string to the next. So if you find your D string's a little bit quiet, you can raise that pole screw up and normalise it a bit. But you can completely change the tonal balance of a pickup by adjusting the height and the pole screw height. So have a play, get a screwdriver out and see where you end up. But that should solve at least part of your problem. Pedal Science, excellent sound, thanks. I've been toing and froing with speakers in my Zilla Studio Pro as well, trying to find the best combo for an SV20. Current favourite pairing is a G12M25 and a G12H 30 anniversary, but your video is making me consider an Alnico once more. And I think pairing speakers to work with a certain amplifier is a real challenge sometimes. And I usually start by taking whatever amp it is I'm trying to match the speakers to, find out what speakers have been most synonymous with that amp in history and start there. And kind of, if that doesn't work for me, experiment a little bit. Now with my JTM 45, which is what I typically run into the Zilla Studio Pro, getting the speaker pairing has been pretty tricky, and I've just changed it again, and I'm now much happier with the sound it's kicking out, so I think I'm going to stick with that for the medium term at least. And in that cabinet, I'm now running the Celestion Heritage G12M greenback, which is really, really nice as a kind of reissue, vintage correct G12M, and I've just paired that with the Scumbag S75 PVC, I think it's called, which kind of sits tonally somewhere between the old Silver Vox Alnicos and the Alnico Blue/Gold. So it's kind of ideally suited to an old school Marshall, and pairing that with the G12M is just absolutely glorious. So yeah, it can be a real challenge to sort of balance speakers out. And a lot of people say that Alnico speakers don't sound good with heavier gain. They absolutely can if they're matched right to whichever amp and pedal setup you're using. So definitely explore Alnico speakers, even if you're into sort of heavier gain stuff. But in a JTM45, that Scumbag just sounds absolutely astonishing. Hagerman 70, I think. A Marshall Plexi circuit compared to most other amps is like a manual transmission in a car compared to an automatic. They take a little bit of extra effort to learn how to use them, and you always have to pay attention to what you're doing. But as soon as you find it has become second nature, it was well worth the trouble because you get much better control and don't have to rely on crutches to get you where you want to go. I loved this analogy because something like the JTM45 and like an old school Plexi amp, they do take getting used to. And I think for me, a big part of that is that the JTM45, at least the sort of original Plexi spec, was tube rectified, which is fairly rare in sort of vintage Marshall amps. Most of them were solid state, and I've really been paying attention to that difference recently, switching between my JTM45 clone and my Orange Retro 50, because that's solid state rectified, and you really can feel a difference, and you do have to play those circuits differently. But as you say, once you get used to it and you're not trying to push the amp to do something it doesn't want to do, you're kind of working to its strengths rather than trying to make it behave like it's a solid state rectified amp when it's not. It is absolutely glorious, and they sound astonishing. I really don't think you can beat them. But tube rectified versus solid state rectified, they are more suited to different things. I think solid state rectified is more suited to kind of heavy rock and riff based stuff, because you hit a big chunky E-core and it just smacks you in the face, whereas with a tube rectified amp it kind of sags a bit and then picks you up with it. So it's just a different experience. But I love both. But absolutely, I love that analogy of it being like an automatic versus a manual car. You do have to kind of use them differently, but once you get used to them, they are absolutely amazing. Safi Maroglu. Dear Joe, having both 1974s, and this was my big kind of phase off I did comparing I think it was the Effectrode Phaser-Matic to some vintage phasers. So I had the 1974 MXR Phase 90, and I can't remember what the other 1974 phaser was. Might have been the Small Stone, might have been the Neutron. But yeah, I had a lot of really nice vintage phasers in that video. Thanks so much. MXR and Effectrode, which one would you use before fuzzers? Maybe a video how you use certain mod pedals before fuzzers. To be honest, I think that concept is more a matter of choosing the right fuzz for that application than it is choosing the right phaser, for a couple of different reasons. Firstly, fuzz pedals just kind of square wave your sound. So if you want to hear real subtleties in your phaser, you're going to want to put them into like a clean amp or a slightly crunchy amp. A fuzz pedal will just slice the waveform and it will kind of hide a lot of those subtleties. But also because, as I've spoken about on this channel before, classic style fuzzers, fuzz faces, tone benders and things, if you put anything in line before them that isn't a guitar cable, you will tend to run into buffering effects, and that will drop the impedance of your signal. It will get rid of the mismatch in impedance on the input of those classic circuits that it relies on for tone shaping, or they rely on for their tone shaping. It will cause the gain to go up, the sounds become really spitty and uncontrollable, the cleanup won't work. So your classic fuzzers want to see guitar fuzz. They don't want to see a mod pedal before that, and it will generally affect how the fuzz sounds way more than be able to hear any subtleties and phases. So you can get around that in a few different ways. You could run your mod after your fuzz. I like doing that. I think that sounds great. Or you could get something like the Citek Fuzzy, which is essentially a classic fuzz face, but it's designed to not rely on that mismatch in impedance on the input, and you can run mod pedals before it and it sounds great. So it kind of behaves more like an overdrive pedal than a classic fuzz, even though it sounds like a fuzz. So I would maybe sort of focus on getting the right fuzz to run a mod into, rather than worry too much about what mod you're running into your fuzz, if that makes any sense. Because if you don't have the right fuzz, it will just send things absolutely haywire, probably sound really tinny, whatever you're putting into it. Because anything other than the guitar cable, if you've got a wireless system or a buffered bypass pedal or anything like active pickups even, it just won't work with a classic fuzz. So focus on getting a fuzz that works with a mod and go from there, I would. Bandit Sharp. Hi Joe, yet another great sounding pedal and great playing, which brings me on to my burning question. Is there such a thing as a bad pedal? I'm slowly coming around to the opinion that there are really no bad pedals out there, just bad playing and out of tune guitars. I'm probably very guilty of that. On their day, all of my 20 odd drive pedals can sound amazing, but on their off day can sound like total tripe. There are so many variables, gain, tone, volume, combination, order pedals, etc, etc. That in the right hands, i.e. yours, maybe, we'll see. My pedals could be made to sound like any pedal on God's earth. A thin and tinny sounding £25 Chinese special drive pedal fattened up with an Effectrode fire bottle boost puts you in the ballpark of great tone. I suppose the same as pouring boiling water on your mashed tatties as opposed to adding a few spoons of Bisto Best. Doesn't make boiling water a bad thing, or Bisto Best the holy grail of or cordon bleu food, but together they work just magic with mashed tatties, if you catch my drift. Therefore, referring back to my original question, is there really such a thing these days as a bad pedal? Just find another one to stack it with and turn it into a great one. Now I want mashed tatties with gravy, to be honest. It's a difficult question. I think, as you say, it completely depends on personal preference, what guitar you're using, what amp you're using, what effect you want to ultimately create, what sort of drive sound you want to create, and what works for you. There are so many variables. And a bad pedal in the right context can be exactly what you need, and much more what you need than an expensive boutique pedal. So there's so much. I think, back in at least the 80s, there were definitely bad pedals out there, and especially the very early days of digital pedals when you had really bad converters and stuff. They would just shred your tone. If you had more than 3 of them together, you'd have no signal left. So I think, back then there were definitely bad pedals that didn't necessarily work in almost any situation. But nowadays there isn't really an excuse for making a bad pedal, I don't think, because especially with the internet and forums and things, the vast majority of drive pedals, even the cheap £25 Chinese clones, are clones of something that's been done for years, and various mods have been done to that circuit, and the schematics are online, and forums debate the differences that one resistor can make to the next, and almost all, not all, but almost all, like, overdrive pedals are a variation on a Tube Screamer, a Klon, a Marshall Blues Breaker. Almost all distortions are a DS1 or MXR Distortion Plus or something like that. Those classic circuits exist. Everyone knows they're good. They're familiar with the sounds, and everybody likes them. And people take those circuits, make modifications to them, add more tone shaping, or 3-band EQ, or extend the gain, or reduce the gain, or fix low-end dropouts and things. And that's where the vast majority of pedals come from nowadays. So I don't think there is such a thing as a bad pedal anymore, just on that basis alone, let alone before you get into everyone has a different personal preference. Some people love the Klon sound, it's their entire world. Other people don't like it. That doesn't make the Klon good or bad, it just makes it more suited to different people. So yeah, I think, especially if you're stacking pedals together, as you said, what's that, a cheap overdrive into a Effectrode fire bottle or whatever, there is no such thing as a bad combination if it works for you in the right context. And this gets you into the whole debate of, if you've ever listened to soloed guitar sounds from famous recordings on YouTube, you'll listen to them and go, there's no low end there, and it is so ear-piercingly upper midi. I don't like it. But in the context of a mix, that works. If you listen to a guitar sound on my channel that I'm doing a demo of, it's really thick in the low end and really kind of meaty and fat. If you try to balance that in a dense rock mix, it will just, either wouldn't hear it or would take over everything. It wouldn't work in that context. So it's all personal preference, it's all context, and you can take a really crap pedal and make it sound amazing for a certain application. So I don't think there is such a thing as a bad pedal, especially not in 2021. Paul Leonard Ewing. Impressive as always. Hagerman always gets low noise, and unlike most other makers of dirt pedals, he maintains definition. I would love to see how he pulls this off with the Metal LM3900, which there has been a demo gone live in the last couple of weeks since you left that comment, so let me know what you think of that. So far, I think this is the best. Thanks, Joe, as usual, another excellent demo. It's so refreshing to have a demo of the pedal instead of at most sites that merely demo the guy's technique. I don't really have the technique to try and show off. I just play rock rhythm and hope for the best. So thank you for your kind words, Paul. But yeah, Hagerman pedals, I've demoed 5 or 6 of those. This is one I haven't done yet. This is coming soon. This is the Octave. These sort of silicon black series. They're really, really great. On most of them, you don't get to adjust the gain. That's fixed, but you can just ride your volume control. They clean up great. And they're really impressive considering the price point. I think they're like $90 or something, which is, I don't know, 65, 70 pounds in UK money. So yeah, they're really, really great for the money. Very, very impressive. Redkern, first comparison video I've ever heard a difference. Kept my head down through all the tests and clean no difference, but when the dirt starts coming, the 6L6s are definitely warmer. And this is another of the bigger videos in the last month. This is the KT66 versus 6L6 tubes in my JTM45 clone. And yet, subtle differences. I think I've got a few comments here discussing the differences, but there wasn't any drastic tonal change between them. Especially when you push the tubes, you could hear, I think that the 6L6s had a bit more low end to them, and the KT66 had a bit more kind of bite and martially mid-range, but they weren't like, vastly different. It wasn't like going from a Fender amp to a Marshall amp at all. Reen Otten, you crank the amp at home without an attenuator. I do. I'm very lucky that I think a lot of people kind of see this environment and think it's a small, residential room. He must be playing at kind of whisper volumes. I'm not. I'm absolutely diming the amps in this room. I do have an attenuator. I've got the Dr. Z brake light, the kind of 45 watt version of the air brake, which I do use with the JTM45 because I don't always want it to be absolutely ripping my head off. But for that video and almost all the demo videos I do, there's no attenuation, it's completely on a shelf somewhere, and I'm absolutely cranking the amp. So yes, I do crank the amp in a very small room. The John Show. 6L6s are thinner, more bottom end, less overdrive like a Fender. KT66s, fuller, more mids, less bottom end, more overdrive like a Marshall. I think that's a pretty good summation of a difference, but again, they are very subtle differences. I wouldn't say that having the 6L6s in there, you would swear in a blindfold test you were listening to a Bassman. And then with the KT66s, you would swear blind you're listening to a JTM45. It was nowhere near that obvious. It was pretty subtle overall. Neil Montgomery. There is only 3 tube manufacturers left in the world. Shuguang in China, Reflector Factory in Saratov, Russia, and JJ in Slovakia. Groove Tubes just relabeled tubes along with Tube Amp Doctor, Ruby Tubes, etc. I like the Shuguang and Gold Lion (Russian) KT66s. And in that video, I was talking about where tubes are made and I was comparing tubes of different manufacturers. So it would be interesting to know where groove tubes are made in those 3 factories. And I think the tongue soles are Russian, so they've been made in the Russian factory, because I was talking about how we were comparing tubes of different manufacturers and how that might play into it. But you might find they were made in the same factory by the same people, just with a different badge on the side. So it'd be interesting to know. But yeah, it's interesting to know there are only 3 tube manufacturers because, of course, guitar amps are pretty much the only technology still currently made that use vacuum tubes. Everything else has been replaced by transistors and things over the years, and now digital technology. Steve Turner, never owned a Fredericks pedal. Very nice. Preferred it without the dip switches being engaged. Sounded a tad more organic on my cheap headphones. And this was the Frederick Effects Accomplished Badger Mark II, which I've just about sort of learnt to say without bursting into laughter. If you ever saw my original demo of the Mark I literally couldn't get past the intro without crying with laughter at saying accomplished badger. But I've just about got it now. And yes, the Mark II, it has the dip switches so you can bring in clipping diodes, soft clipping and hard clipping, make it more of an overdrive or more of a distortion. It's great to have that, but I agree, I actually preferred the sounds in that pedal with both the gain set at about 1 o'clock, but without the clipping diodes. I think it's just a really nice sound. And having the charge pump take up to 18 volts and that transformer on the output were subtle differences, but they were definitely just more pleasing to play with than the Mark I. So a really, really great pedal out. Really like it. Enrico Palazzo. This pedal has the greatest name ever. Yeah, exactly. I was surprised by the quality of the buffer at Unity gain, and the germanium gain was really cool. Frederick pedals are great and affordable too. Affordable, not cheap. Yeah, I think the Accomplished Badger is about £120 or something like that. So in the world of boutique pedals, pretty affordable. But as you say, you can get much cheaper pedals, but not necessarily better. Joe, I have 2 unrelated questions. Ooh. Do you have or use any low wattage amp like 5-watt amps? I saw a lot of famous players, Joe Perry, Phil X, etc. combine their big 50/100 watt amps with small 5-watt amps. And now you've got your Vajra, would you try this combination of small and high wattage amps on a video? And number 2, have you ever tried Alnico 8 magnet pickups? Usually Alnico 8 magnets are associated with high gain, like ceramic magnet pickups, but there are quite a few guys, Arcane Pickups in LA for example, that create pickups using Alnico 8 and very few winding for more vintage inspired pickups with A8 magnet qualities. I'll be honest, Enrico, I didn't know Alnico 8 existed. I've never come across a set of pickups with A8 magnets in. Usually I live in the vintage camp, which is Alnico 2 through 5. I wouldn't be against trying them, for sure, but given how much I love those old designs, by definition an Alnico 8 magnet pickup wouldn't be one of those old designs, or it would be a variation on it, and it wouldn't be like what I'm used to hearing. I doubt I would prefer it over a standard PAF pickup, for example. I wouldn't be against trying it at all. Question number 1, the lower wattage amps. I've got my Cornell Romany Plus, which is a sort of 10 watt tweed champ, but you can switch it down to 5 watts. It's got a 12-inch speaker, so it's not exactly like the original champs, but it's pretty ballpark. I haven't really tried pairing it with a much higher powered amp. It sounds amazing on its own, to be honest. I used it for lots of demos over the years, and if I'm practicing late at night and I don't want to be tearing my own head off or annoying the neighbours, I'll just use 5-watt amp. So I love playing it. I haven't tried pairing it. It might make an interesting video. If anyone is interested in seeing that, drop it in the comments, and if there's enough interest, I will try and put that together for you. Bill Ayres. Hey Joe, a sort of unrelated question on your speakers. So one of yours is a Heritage G12M in the Zilla Studio Pro with the JTM45, as I was saying earlier. Have you ever compared that model with the bog standard new Chinese G12M? I recently bought one but haven't yet installed it. I bought that model over the Heritage because Greg Gemino says it is his favourite and prefers it over the Heritage. Someday I hope to play through a Gemino JTM45 into a G12M loaded cab, just to see what he means by that. Funny you should say that. I shot that video last week, so it'll be coming in the next 2 or 3 weeks probably. Slight spoiler alert, they are pretty different speakers, to be honest. The Heritage has a lot more low end than the standard G12M, and the standard Chinese made one has a much more kind of fizzy upper mid-range to it. And the Heritage, it still has a fizzy upper mid-range, but it's just a more balanced speaker, I think. Still definitely sounds like a greenback, medium magnet greenback to me. But using it in a 2x12, in a 4x12 it might be a slightly different story because the low end might become a bit overwhelming, especially with something like a JTM45. But in a 2x12 paired with that scumbag Alnico, I much prefer the Heritage. It just it's a more pleasing sound to listen to, I think, which is more accurate to like the original pre-roller Celestion G12Ms. I assume the Heritage, and it has that kind of woody sound I would associate with those old speakers. But a lot of people I've say exactly the same thing, that they prefer the standard Chinese greenback over the slightly more posh Heritage version. I can absolutely see why people would prefer it, definitely. For me, I prefer the Heritage, but yeah, both great speakers, and look out for that video in a couple of weeks. They are pretty different overall. Enrico Palazzo, again, crazy tube circuits always do interesting stuff. The phase 45 and 90 settings were great, but the real surprise was the doppelganger setting. Would be cool if they do a separate pedal just for the love tone setting and the RMFF setting of the Constellation. The doppelganger's a really cool phaser. That's the love tone doppelganger, which as far as I know, I've never seen anybody else sort of clone that pedal. I'm sure what's the old love tone designer called? Can't remember his name. Does a lot of work with Thorpe effects now. They might have reissued that circuit as a Thorpe pedal. I'm not sure. They've done that with a few of the old love tones like the brown sauce and the big cheese and things. I'm not sure if they've done the doppelganger, but I've never seen anybody else kind of take on that circuit. Really, really cool. I need to spend more time with that pedal because I shot the demo and I've been so busy recently that I haven't really got to play it too much. So I'd love to get to know it more. But that doppelganger setting was really, really cool for sure. Oh, Enrico Palazzo yet again. I'm a big Magnatone fan, and when this pedal came out, I had to have it. It's been on my board since day one. The vibrato is gorgeous, but also the preamp / drive circuit is something special. It does have a Tweedish character, but different in its own unique way. Origin is a fantastic company, and this is the Origin Effects Magma 57 kind of Magnatone in the box thing. Really, really great pedal. I absolutely love it. And as Enrico says, the drive section, it's absolutely worthy of being an overdrive pedal in its own right, even before you kick the vibrato in. It has an amazing breakup. It's built on the same topology as the Revival drive, so it's probably no surprise that it sounds and feels amazing. But yeah, they've absolutely nailed that circuit. And there is a video somewhere of somebody comparing it to an original Magnatone, and they're playing the Origin through a Hot Rod Deluxe or something. It's pretty close. They haven't dialed it in spot on, but it is certainly ballpark. Amazing pedal. Tom, nice work, Joe. I've had one of these for a while and I love it. How do you think it compares to your other Magnatone pedals that don't have the drive section? Again, interesting you should say that. That video is coming in a few weeks. I compare that to the Big Tone Music Brewery Maggie and the Crazy Tube Circuit's Memphis. So the Big Tone Music Brewery is just a vibrato pedal. The Memphis has a sort of preamp in it, and of course the Origin is like a full amp. So 3 different kind of tiers of Magnatone vibrato there. So check out for that video. It's an interesting one for sure. Bandit Sharp. Anyone got any idea why Joe has stopped responding to all comments? The last few posts have had 0 input from the man himself. If you want to stimulate healthy debate and opinion, let's debate. I'm still here. I've just had a really busy month and I've been overseas. I flew back a couple of days ago, had to go over to the Isle of Man for a wedding. So I've just had such a full-on month, and obviously as a channel grows, more comments come in and it takes more time to reply to them. So I'm doing my best with keeping up with the comments. I certainly read them all. I reply to as many as I can, but sometimes things get away from me. And unfortunately, this channel isn't kind of full-time employment for me. So I give as much time to it as I'm able to, but sometimes I'm a little slow to reply. So sorry about that, but don't worry, I am still here. Helix Plane. The normal tremolo sounds in it are a lot like the old Dunlop TS1, and this is the Effectrode Delta-Trem that I put up a couple of days ago. Astonishing sounding tube-driven tremolo, is ridiculously good. When I used it, I always put a compressor in front of it, so the little tube push in this pedal sounds just right to me, plus it does all that extra cool stuff. My credit card senses danger and is hiding. That was the bit I wanted to put in there. I love that comment. Yeah, the Delta-Trem is just absolutely astonishing, and it, as I say, for a lot of the Effectrode stuff, it can be whatever you want it to be. If you want a standard sine wave mono tremolo pedal, it's the best one you'll ever hear. If you want a stereo, kind of different sides doing different things and MIDI functionality and all that stuff, it can do that too. So it can be whatever you want it to be in the tremolo world. But I don't think you'll find a more amp-like tremolo sound. It is just so warm and inspiring. You can play through the effect. So good, so good. David Wallace, love your videos, Joe. It's been here for a year. Come on, now tell us you didn't really change the caps in the video. And this was the comparing the sort of cheap 1p capacitors to the sort of 30 quid Lux paper and oil ones that I put up last year. As much as I would love to say that I've trolled everybody and didn't change the capacitors in that video, I changed every single one. It took about a day and a bit to shoot it and put it all together, soldering each capacitor in the guitar, letting it cool so the temperature change didn't affect the sound. I did all that kind of manually and as it should have been. So as much as I would love to say that I didn't change anything, I did it properly, sadly. And finally this month, Anonymous. Very clever. There is nothing wrong with using digital-based equipment. Don't think anybody ever said there was, did they? This channel is all about analog gear. I prefer analog gear. Nothing wrong with digital gear. It's just not my bag, so I don't use it on the channel. That's it. People can use digital gear. Lots of it sounds great. I don't. And that's fine, I think. So, there we go. That's this month's Q&A done and dusted. Some really fun videos coming in October. The speaker comparison that I mentioned earlier, the standard Chinese G12M compared to the Heritage. That's an interesting one. Wow, what else is there? The Magnetone Vibrato Shootout. I'm going to be shooting a video soon comparing my JTM45 to the Orange Retro 50 and kind of comparing those classic circuits from those two iconic British manufacturers. I think that should be a lot of fun. So some really good stuff coming in the next month. But as always, folks, thank you for watching. I hope this Q&A was interesting. I know a lot of you kind of keep up with these and like them. Any more comments, drop them underneath and I'll do my best to answer them in the comments section or include them in next month's Q&A. And please do carry on subscribing. I know I always say it, but it does help to grow the channel. It helps the YouTube algorithm do its magic and get more views coming in and keep it growing. So please do subscribe if you haven't done so. It does make a huge difference. But for now, thank you, folks, and I will see you very, very soon. Bye-bye.